Pests beware, your fields have heroes. The Pests and Predators podcast is brought to you by Field Heroes and is powered by the Western Grains Research Foundation. Learn how beneficial insects fight pests and protect your crops. Visit fieldheroes.ca today.
Well, there's no more important economic relationship, well, at least to Canada, than the Canada-U.S. relationship. And it's one that, I don't know, maybe has been understudied or maybe there's some areas to learn more about what drives this relationship from both sides of the border. Joining us right now is a familiar face to RealAgriculture. It is Carlo Dade. He is Director of International Policy with the School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary. Carlo, it is great to chat with you again.
Great to be back. And I think my first time not with the Canada-U.S. Foundation. So thanks for the introduction.
Yeah, there you go. That's right. No longer with Canada-U.S. Okay. Big announcement. I guess tell us about what exactly you're a big driver of this. The University of Calgary is diving in and looking at trying to better understand the relationship between Canada and the U.S. and from what angles?
Sure. So this is an idea that you heard this and a light bulb, I imagine, immediately went off. We've discussed this repeatedly on the show. The need for our ability to understand the new U.S. So we've seen what for Canadians are drastic changes in the U.S., the tariffs, the threats over the 51st state. We're seeing a U.S. that a lot of us don't recognize. Now, I'm American originally, so I recognize these things. But in Canada, it's coming as new to a lot of us. And this is causing a problem. Obviously, the tariff shocks on our economy, 88% of our exports in Alberta go to the U.S. Those tariff shocks are greater than any damage China has done to us. We're getting these surprises constantly, and we're on our back foot in terms of responding. We're not able to act proactively with the U.S. We're responding to shock after shock. So studying the relationship is what you would expect a university to do, but developing proactive solutions, applied research is something else a university can do if pushed in that direction. And so that's what this initiative is. We want to develop understanding and connections to understand the new U.S., not the U.S. we all grew up with, the good old NAFTA, best friend in the world in the U.S., but understand the social, economic, and political changes of a new reality in the U.S., and then develop responses, new data, new connections, et cetera, to enable us, your listeners personally, and the businesses, government, to be able to better manage that relationship. And lastly, we also want to use this work to train the next generation of North Americanists. So we have new experts coming out of the universities that work with us that understand the new U.S., not just the U.S. that produced NAFTA, but can drive policy changes going forward.
Do you have a handle on how new is new? Like how much carryover, if we're going to put it in these simple terms, new and old, how much carryover is there of the old?
Wow, that's a great question. You're the first reporter to ask that. So good on you for digging in. But at the launch in Calgary, we had a roundtable with partners from the U.S. and other universities, including Chris Kuchar from down in Lethbridge. Jeff Hale was on the phone, also from Lethbridge. But that is the key question. A lot of what we're seeing in the U.S. are long-term trends that people who are deeply, deeply familiar with the U.S. Recognize. Not just the changes in the Reagan Revolution or the Nixon administration, which imposed tariffs, but going back to the 50s, there's always been this undercurrent in the U.S. of the MAGA movement. What's different now is that those undercurrents have seized power, not just at the state level, like George Wallace in Alabama, but they seized the national levers of power. So trends that we could look on with alarm or bemusement in Canada have suddenly broken through the gates of power, and we're seeing them take over trade policy. We're seeing these forces dismantle U.S. institutions, attack the rule of law, take away certainty around trade agreements that we've had. So while the elements of the MAGA movement go back to things like the John Birch Society. Some of your listeners may be familiar with the group that almost took over the Republican Party in the 50s until it was stopped by Bill Buckley. Um, what's different now is that these folks are actually in power and they're actually dismantling things. And I would argue that taking over control of power is what's changed and what we've
So,
missed.
so in order to create, this kind of initiative, my assumption is that there's a belief this research is warranted because the change is systemic. This is
It,
not a flash, a temporary, sort of a temporary fling in college. This is something that it really has some lasting power, in the form that we know it today.
It's going to last longer than your average high school romance, yes. Not just the 187, 88 weeks we have left of the Trump administration, but what comes after the Trump administration. We've seen changes within the Republican Party that we didn't think we'd see. Again, you'd have to go back to the 1950s and the threatened takeover by the John Birch Society to see something so drastic. The Bushes, the dynasty, the Bush family dynasty, gutted. Republicans we thought we knew, who were free traders, who were allies, have suddenly turned. This is deeper and it's more systemic. The grassroots of the Republican Party has been remade. The Bush Republicans are kicked out, and that's just the Republicans. What is happening on the Democrats? The only certainty we have with the Democrats is we're not going to go back to the Democrats we knew, the Democrats that were so universally despised that they've lost 2 elections. Now, the vote totals were a bit higher, but the discontent within the Democratic Party is just as deep. So we're going to see potentially after the current Trump administration, remaking on the left. And so progressivism in America, traditional Democratic parties in America are being remade. We need the ability to get ahead of these changes. Stop looking in the rearview mirror of the good old days of the past with NAFTA and look through the windshield at what's coming with these changes in the US. And last point, once you lower the bar in terms of accepted political behavior, once you open the Pandora's box of things like tariff policy, I cannot think of any instance where the bar has been raised when it's been lowered or Pandora's box has been shut. You're setting a new norm, a lower norm that we're going to have to deal with going forward.
Yeah, the current Democratic Party is not the party of Bill Clinton. That's for sure as well. And at some point on some of the policies, I think about the proposal for there to be an increased tax on people making over, I think it was $1 million. At some point, a policy like that coming from the Republican side or from the White House, it kind of connects with where Bernie Sanders is, right? And so there's a very weird dynamic in trying to understand it. Now, we have talked a lot about the politics of all this, but I'm assuming that this research is going to look into the underbelly of some of the the social side of things, not just the economics, but just not from here's what's happening in DC.
Right. So we're going to stay away from the social issues. So let me lay out the 3 areas very quickly.
Great.
One is research and solutions. So key part is and solutions for issues that Albertans face immediately. So things like better ways to respond to tariff shocks, supply chain visibility for municipalities so they can see how critical inputs they buy, the ability to produce clean drinking water, the implements to produce that, how those are impacted by tariffs. We'll also do modeling scenarios for a CUSMA renegotiation. So small businesses and others can have information to help them predict what's coming. So we're going to do a set to respond to immediate issues that Albertans face. There'll be deeper research, and this is what's really new about the initiative. We want to take a methodology, here I sound like an academic, developed by the Carnegie Endowment that tried to build a U.S. foreign policy from the base, from stakeholders, not in Washington, D.C., but in Colorado, Nebraska, Ohio. They took the usual policy mechanisms the mechanisms for creating policy, where you have quote unquote experts like myself gathering, looking at the data, deciding what's needed, and then selling those solutions to voters. Instead, they flipped the process and started with people who deal with these issues every day and built an agenda from the ground up. We want to work with US partners in the Mountain West and Plains to do the same thing. So your show in the States will be vital for us getting out the message, finding people and talking to them. But we want to attempt this to create an agenda for working with the Americans that doesn't come from the elites, that does not come just from Washington and Ottawa, but that comes from communities in the West. That's a huge part of what we want to do for understanding the new US. And lastly, we want to use all of this work to take students and train them in practically in hands-on how to deal with the new US. Yeah. So there are three interrelated goals here, and it's all being done in the West. So everything else is generally done in Ottawa. I'm part of 6 North American working groups. And how many of them are not based in Ottawa, Washington? One, the guys in Los Angeles working on the World Cup and how we work together in North America on the World Cup. Everyone else is in the capitals, and the one that's not is on the coast. So we really haven't seen this sort of thing coming from the heartland.
Yeah, important work. As somebody that spends their life explaining Canada to Americans and explaining Americans to Canadians, I think this is a very worthwhile work that has to be done. And I think it's interesting because I think a lot of times Canadians fall back to, well, Americans don't know anything about us. And I've argued for a long time, Canadians don't know as much about the US as they think they do. It's through certain very narrow lenses of exposure, not necessarily getting to the root of it through a wider lens. So I think this is very important work. Congratulations, Carlo, on the big announcement. Sorry I couldn't be there for it. I apologize. But thanks for coming on the show here, and looking forward to getting updates on a regular basis on how things are working out.
Sure, and I see the ways that we can work together on this, especially with your listeners, because these are the folks who are tied to the relationship, who deal with it on a daily basis, and we certainly want to have their involvement and for them to be part of this too.
Great stuff. Well, we would love to help out in any way we can.